Timothy Simmons never expected to become the savior of an alien world, let alone the guardian of 3 Andorian princesses. Yet here he was, standing before the Andorian High Council, his revolutionary defense system plans clutched tightly in his hands. The council chamber hummed with tension. Taurus, Andoria's leading scientist and mother of 3 daughters, had just finished presenting Timothy's groundbreaking work to the skeptical alien leaders. The room fell silent as the council members exchanged wary glances, their distrust of humans evident in their narrowed eyes and twitching antennae. Andoria faced imminent destruction. A massive asteroid hurtled towards the planet, its impact promising to obliterate all life on the blue-skinned aliens' homeworld. Timothy, a brilliant human exchange student studying at Andoria's most prestigious university, had designed a defense system that could save them all. But convincing the xenophobic council to trust a human's technology was proving to be as challenging as deflecting the asteroid itself. Taurus stepped forward, her azure skin glistening under the chamber's harsh lights. "Honorable Council," she began, her voice steady despite the stakes. "I stake my reputation on the success of Timothy's plan. It is our only hope for survival." The council leader leaned forward, his silver eyes boring into Timothy. "Very well," he said, his voice cold. "We will implement the human's defense system. But know this, if it fails, both you and the human will face execution for endangering Andoria." Timothy swallowed hard, acutely aware of the weight now resting on his shoulders. As he left the chamber, Taurus pulled him aside, her expression grave. "Timothy," she whispered, "I have arranged for my 3 daughters to be placed under your protection. If Andoria falls, you must ensure their survival." The human student nodded, stunned by the enormous responsibility thrust upon him. He had come to Andoria to study, not to save a planet and become the guardian of alien princesses. But he knew he couldn't let Taurus or her people down. Over the next few days, Timothy worked tirelessly alongside Andorian engineers to construct and deploy his asteroid deflection array. The technology pushed the limits of both human and Andorian capabilities, combining the best of both worlds in a desperate bid for survival. But not everyone wanted Andoria to survive. Rival alien factions saw the planet's potential destruction as an opportunity for galactic expansion. Sabotage attempts plagued the project, each setback bringing the asteroid closer to impact. As the final countdown began, Timothy found himself not only battling technical challenges, but also navigating the complex web of Andorian politics and cultural taboos. The fate of an entire world rested on his shoulders, along with the lives of Taurus's daughters and the future of human-Andorian relations. With time running out and the asteroid looming large in Andoria's sky, Timothy Simmons prepared to activate his defense system. He knew that in the next few moments, he would either become a hero to an alien race or die trying. Either way, he was about to prove humanity's worth to a skeptical alien civilization, and possibly gain an unexpected family in the process. Timothy's finger hovered over the activation switch, his heart pounding in his chest. The asteroid loomed large in Andoria's sky, a harbinger of destruction visible even from the ground. As he prepared to initiate the defense system, a piercing alarm shattered the tense silence of the control room. "What's happening?" Timothy shouted, his eyes darting to the main display screen. An Andorian engineer, his antennae twitching with agitation, responded, "Critical malfunction in the orbital component. The array won't activate." Taurus rushed to the console, her fingers flying over the holographic interface. "The recalibration module is offline. Without it, the deflection beam won't align properly." Timothy's mind raced. They were out of time, and the asteroid wouldn't wait. He turned to Taurus, his expression set with steadfast perseverance. "We need to manually recalibrate the module." "Impossible," Taurus replied, shaking her head. "The component is in low orbit. Our ships can't reach it in time, and no Andorian could survive the atmospheric conditions at that altitude." Timothy took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to propose. "But a human might." The control room fell silent, all eyes turning to Timothy. Taurus stared at him, her silver eyes wide with disbelief. "You can't be serious. The risk is too great." "We don't have a choice," Timothy insisted. "My physiology might be better suited to Withstand the conditions. It's our only chance. The Andorian High Council members, who had been observing from a raised platform, erupted in protest. Their leader stepped forward, antennae quivering with anger. We will not entrust the fate of our world to a human's reckless actions. Taurus turned to face the council, her voice steady and resolute. With all due respect, honored ones, we have already entrusted our fate to Timothy's invention. If he believes this is our best chance, I support his decision. As the council argued, Taurus pulled Timothy aside. Are you certain about this? She asked, her voice low. Timothy nodded. I have to try. Taurus's expression softened. She reached into a hidden pocket in her robes and produced a sleek, silvery suit. Take this. It's a prototype atmospheric suit, enhanced with our latest technology. It will improve your chances. Timothy accepted the suit gratefully, marveling at its lightweight yet sturdy construction. As he prepared for the mission, the door to the control room slid open, revealing 3 young Andorian women. Taurus's daughters had arrived. The eldest stepped forward, her eyes locked on Timothy. I'm Lyra, she said, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. These are my sisters, Vega and Celeste. Timothy nodded, unsure of how to respond. Lyra approached him, holding out a small, iridescent object. This is a traditional Andorian good luck charm, she explained. Please, take it with you. Touched by the gesture, Timothy accepted the charm, feeling its warm pulse against his palm. Thank you, he said softly. Minutes later, Timothy found himself in a launch bay, encased in the Andorian suit. The charm hung around his neck, a comforting weight against his chest. As the airlock cycled open, he took one last look at the assembled Andorians, Taurus, her daughters, and the engineering team. Then, with a deep breath, he stepped out into the harsh Andorian atmosphere. The ascent was grueling. Wind buffeted Timothy as he used the suit's propulsion system to climb higher. The planet's unique magnetic field interfered with his communications, leaving him in eerie silence. As he neared the malfunctioning component, a flash of movement caught his eye. A sleek, dark ship materialized out of nowhere, its stealth systems deactivating as it closed in on Timothy's position. Panic surged through him as he realized the danger. Saboteurs had come to finish the job. Suddenly, his comm crackled to life. Timothy! It was Commander Czar, head of Andorian security. Hostiles detected! Evasive action! Timothy didn't need to be told twice. He pushed his suit's thrusters to their limit, banking hard to avoid a barrage of energy blasts from the enemy ship. Around him, Andorian defense craft appeared, engaging the saboteurs in a frantic space battle. Dodging debris and weapons fire, Timothy finally reached the malfunctioning component. His hands shook as he accessed the control panel, the sounds of battle raging around him. He forced himself to focus, running through the recalibration sequence Taurus had drilled into him. Just as the final adjustments were made, a stray blast struck nearby. The shockwave sent Timothy tumbling, his tether snapping like a fragile thread. Panic gripped him as he floated free, the planet's curved horizon spinning in his view. In the control room, alarms blared. Lyra watched in horror as Timothy's life signs fluctuated on the main screen. Without a word, she sprinted from the room, ignoring her mother's shouts. Lyra commandeered a small rescue craft, launching before anyone could stop her. She weaved through the battle, her piloting skills pushing the craft to its limits. Timothy's suit beacon guided her, growing stronger as she closed in. Hold on, Timothy, she muttered, gritting her teeth as she dodged another explosion. Timothy's oxygen levels were dropping rapidly when he saw the rescue craft approaching. Lyra's voice came through his comm, staticky but clear. Grab on! With the last of his strength, Timothy reached out. Lyra's blue hand grasped his, pulling him to safety. As they sped back to the station, the Andorian forces drove off the last of the attackers. Back in the control room, Timothy and Lyra burst in, breathing heavily. All eyes turned to the main screen, where the asteroid now dominated the view. The moment of truth had arrived. Timothy stepped forward, his hand finding the activation switch once more. He glanced at Taurus, then at Lyra, drawing strength from their presence. With a silent prayer, he engaged the defense system. A brilliant beam of energy erupted from the orbital array, striking the asteroid with pinpoint accuracy. The control room held its breath, waiting to see if Timothy's invention would save their world. The beam struck the asteroid with devastating force, its energy rippling across the surface in waves of blinding light. For a moment, the entire control room held its breath, all eyes fixed on the holographic display, tracking the asteroid's trajectory. "It's working!" an engineer shouted, his antennae twitching with excitement. The room erupted in cheers as the massive space rock's path began to alter, veering away from its collision course with Andoria. Timothy allowed himself a brief smile, but his relief was short-lived. As he watched the display, he noticed something odd about the asteroid's behavior. Its course correction wasn't as pronounced as their calculations had predicted. Taurus noticed it too. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice cutting through the celebration. "The deflection isn't strong enough." Timothy's mind raced as he analyzed the data streaming across the screens. Suddenly, he spotted the problem. "The asteroid's magnetic field," he exclaimed. "It's interfering with our targeting systems." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The defense system, while partially effective, wouldn't be enough to fully divert the asteroid. Andoria was still in danger. Timothy turned to Taurus, his expression grim but determined. "We need to manually adjust the targeting algorithm. It's the only way to compensate for the interference." Taurus nodded, her silver eyes reflecting the urgency of the situation. "The main control hub is in the central spire. But Timothy, it's too dangerous. The atmospheric conditions—" "I'll go with him," Lyra interrupted, stepping forward. Her gaze met Timothy's, unwavering. "My knowledge of Andorian technology could be crucial." Before anyone could object, alarms blared throughout the facility. Commander Czar's voice crackled over the intercom. "Security breach. Anti-human extremists led by Counselor Vex are attempting to sabotage the array. All personnel, initiate lockdown procedures." Chaos erupted as engineers scrambled to secure their stations. Timothy grabbed Lyra's arm, shouting over the din, "We have to get to that control hub now." They sprinted from the room, Taurus's voice fading behind them as she coordinated the defense of the facility. The corridors were a blur as they raced towards the central spire, the sounds of conflict echoing in the distance. As they reached the base of the spire, a group of extremists rounded the corner, energy weapons raised. Timothy and Lyra dove behind a row of storage containers, just as blasts of sizzling energy scorched the wall behind them. "This way!" Lyra hissed, pulling Timothy towards a maintenance hatch. They crawled through a narrow service tunnel, emerging in the spire's central lift. As the lift shot upwards, Timothy's mind whirled with calculations. "We'll need to redistribute the array's energy," he explained to Lyra. "Sacrifice its long-range capability for a more focused burst." Lyra's antennae twitched as she processed the idea. "Risky," she said, "but it might work. We'll only get one shot at this." The lift doors opened to reveal the control hub, a circular room dominated by a massive holographic interface. Timothy and Lyra rushed to the main console, their fingers flying over the controls as they began the recalibration process. Outside, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The asteroid's gravitational pull was already affecting Andoria's atmosphere, stirring up violent storms that lashed against the spire's windows. In the streets below, loyal Andorian forces clashed with the extremists, energy weapons flashing in the darkening sky. As Timothy and Lyra worked feverishly, the door to the control hub burst open. A group of extremists poured in, led by a tall, scarred Andorian with cold eyes. "Step away from the console, human!" the leader snarled, training his weapon on Timothy. Lyra positioned herself between Timothy and the extremists. "Counselor Vex," she said, her voice steady despite the danger, "you're making a mistake. Timothy's technology is our only hope." Vex's antennae quivered with awe-inspiring rage. "Relying on humans will be our downfall. We'll find our own solution without alien interference." A tremor shook the building, nearly throwing them off their feet. Timothy used the distraction to hit the final command sequence. The array hummed to life, energy building to levels that made the air crackle with power. "It's done," Timothy announced, facing Vex and his followers. "In a few seconds, that beam will fire. You can kill us if you want, but it won't stop what's coming. The room fell silent, the tension palpable as they waited for Vex's response. Another violent tremor rocked the spire, and for a moment Timothy thought the counselor would give the order to fire. Instead, Vex lowered his weapon, his expression a mix of defeat and awe as he gazed out the window at the approaching asteroid. "May the ancestors forgive us," he murmured. The array fired, a blinding beam of pure energy lancing out from the spire's peak. It struck the asteroid with unimaginable force, enveloping the massive rock in a dazzling cocoon of light. For several heart-stopping seconds, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly but surely, the asteroid's trajectory began to shift. Cheers erupted from the streets below as Andorians watched their salvation unfold in the sky above. But Timothy's elation was short-lived. As he studied the holographic display, he realized the asteroid's new course was taking it dangerously close to Andoria's largest moon. "We're not out of danger yet," he said, turning to Lyra and the stunned extremists. "If that asteroid collides with the moon, it could destabilize Andoria's entire orbital system." As the immediate threat to the planet passed, the control hub doors burst open once more. Commander Zar and his forces stormed in, quickly disarming Vex and his followers. "You've saved us all," Zar said to Timothy, his tone grudgingly respectful. "But I fear this is only the beginning of our troubles." Timothy nodded, his gaze fixed on the holographic display showing the asteroid's new trajectory. "We've averted one disaster," he said, "but we may have created another. We need to find a way to prevent that asteroid from hitting Andoria's moon, or all of this will have been for nothing." Lyra stepped closer to Timothy, her hand brushing against his. "We'll find a way," she said softly. "Together." As the dust settled and the political fallout of the coup attempt began to unfold, Timothy knew that the greatest challenges still lay ahead. He had earned the respect of many Andorians, but now he had to prove that humanity's involvement could lead to lasting peace between their species. With the asteroid still looming as a threat to Andoria's entire orbital system, Timothy prepared himself for the next phase of this unexpected journey. The fate of an alien world, and perhaps the future of human-Andorian relations, rested in his hands. Timothy's eyes remained fixed on the holographic display, his mind racing with calculations. The asteroid's new trajectory loomed ominously close to Andoria's largest moon, Lumina. He turned to Lyra, his expression grave. "We've bought Andoria some time, but Lumina is now in danger. If that asteroid hits the moon, it could destabilize the entire orbital system." Lyra's antennae twitched with concern. "What do you propose?" Timothy's gaze swept across the control room, taking in the mix of relieved and anxious faces. "We need to move Lumina out of the asteroid's path. It's audacious, but I think we can do it using a network of powerful thrusters." Commander Zar raised an eyebrow. "Move an entire moon? Is such a thing even possible?" "With Andorian technology, yes," Timothy replied. "But we'll need to act fast." Taurus stepped forward, her silver eyes gleaming with persistence. "You have full access to our propulsion technology, Timothy. I'll assign our top engineers to work under your direction." As the room buzzed with activity, a slender Andorian woman approached. Her features bore a striking resemblance to Taurus, but her expression was guarded, skeptical. Taurus gestured to her. "This is my middle daughter, Vega. She's our expert in gravitational dynamics. She'll be essential to this project." Vega nodded curtly, her gaze appraising Timothy. "I hope your skills match your ambition, human." Over the next few days, Timothy found himself immersed in a whirlwind of activity. The control hub became a hive of innovation as he worked alongside the Andorian team to design and construct the massive thrusters needed for Lumina. Adapting human engineering principles to Andorian technology proved challenging, but Timothy's quick thinking and flexibility impressed even the most skeptical members of the team. Vega, initially aloof, began to warm to Timothy as she witnessed his problem-solving skills firsthand. "Your solution to the power distribution issue was unexpected," she admitted one evening as they pored over schematics, "but effective." Timothy allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes an outsider's perspective can be valuable. Their progress, however, was not without obstacles. News of the coup attempt had spread, and anti-human sentiment was on the rise. As Timothy walked through the corridors of the facility, he could feel the weight of distrustful gazes upon him. One morning, Lyra burst into the control hub, her face taut with worry. "Timothy, you need to see this." She activated a view screen, revealing footage of protests erupting in major Andorian cities. Crowds of blue-skinned demonstrators filled the streets, their voices rising in a cacophony of anger. "Remove the humans," they chanted. "Andoria for Andorians." Timothy's heart sank as he watched the scene unfold. "This complicates things," he murmured. Commander Czar entered, his expression grim. "The High Council is under pressure to revoke your authority and take control of the Lumina project." "But that could jeopardize everything we've worked for," Lyra protested. Czar nodded. "Which is why we need to change public opinion, and fast." Over the next few days, Czar orchestrated a public relations campaign showcasing Timothy's achievements. Footage of the successful asteroid deflection was broadcast across Andoria, along with updates on the Lumina project's progress. Meanwhile, work on the moon intensified. Timothy found himself spending long hours on the lunar surface, overseeing the installation of the massive thrusters. The harsh, airless environment of Lumina was unforgiving, but the experimental environmental suits provided by Taurus allowed them to work tirelessly. It was during one of these excursions that Timothy made a startling discovery. As he was analyzing Lumina's geological composition, his instruments detected large deposits of an unknown element deep within the moon's core. Excited, he brought his findings to Taurus. Her eyes widened as she examined the data. "This element, it's incredibly rare," she breathed. "With its properties, it could revolutionize space travel." Timothy nodded, understanding the implications. "This could be the key to a new era of cooperation between our species." As the deadline for the asteroid's arrival drew near, tension in the control hub reached a fever pitch. The thrusters were nearly complete, but a critical malfunction in the main power distribution system threatened to derail their efforts. Timothy stared at the diagnostic readouts, his mind racing. "The only way to activate the thrusters in time is to manually override the system from Lumina's surface," he announced. A hush fell over the room. The dangers of such a mission were clear to everyone present. "I'll go," Timothy said, breaking the silence. "My human physiology might better withstand the conditions." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes meeting Timothy's. "I'm coming with you." Taurus looked between them, conflict evident on her face. Finally, she nodded. "Very well. But you'll need these." She gestured to a pair of sleek, advanced environmental suits. "They're our latest design, built to withstand Lumina's most extreme conditions." As Timothy and Lyra prepared for their departure, Vega approached, clutching a datapad. "I've made some last-minute adjustments to the thruster positioning," she said, her usual reserve giving way to urgency. "These calculations could make all the difference." The three of them huddled together, refining the plan. Despite the gravity of the situation, Timothy felt a warmth in his chest. In that moment, the differences between human and Andorian seemed to fade away. As they made their final preparations, a small figure darted through the crowd. It was Celeste, Taurus's youngest daughter. She pressed a small, intricate device into Timothy's hand. "For luck," she said, her young face solemn. Timothy closed his fingers around the heirloom, touched by the gesture. Moments later, he and Lyra boarded the specially designed spacecraft. As they lifted off, Timothy could see the gathered Andorians watching from below. He took a deep breath, knowing that the fate of this alien world now rested in their hands. The journey to Lumina was fraught with unexpected challenges. As they neared the moon, gravitational anomalies caused by the approaching asteroid buffeted their craft. Timothy's hands flew over the controls, his piloting skills pushed to the limit as he navigated the treacherous approach. With a bone-jarring thud, they touched down on Lumina's barren surface. Timothy and Lyra exchanged a glance, then began their race against time. They had mere hours to reach the control center and activate the thrusters before the asteroid's gravitational influence would render their efforts futile. As they made their way across the lunar landscape, the silhouette of the massive thrusters loomed against the star-filled sky. Timothy felt the weight of an entire world's hopes on his shoulders. With Lyra by his side, he pressed on, knowing that the real challenge was only beginning. The real challenge was only the start of their grueling ordeal on Lumina's unforgiving surface. Timothy and Lyra activated their environmental suits' magnetic boots, anchoring themselves against the moon's minimal gravity as they set out toward the looming silhouettes of the massive thrusters. The lunar landscape stretched before them, a wasteland of craters and jagged rock formations. Each step kicked up plumes of fine dust that hung suspended in the airless environment, creating a shimmering haze that obscured their vision. "Watch your footing," Timothy warned, his voice crackling through the suit's comm system. "These rock formations are unstable." As if to punctuate his words, a nearby outcropping crumbled, sending a cascade of boulders tumbling across their path. Lyra nimbly sidestepped the debris, her Andorian reflexes proving invaluable in the low-gravity environment. "We're making good time," Lyra said, checking the holographic display on her wrist. "But these gravitational fluctuations are intensifying. The asteroid's influence is growing stronger." Timothy nodded, feeling the subtle but increasing pull as they trudged onward. The control center finally came into view, a squat, fortified structure nestled between two colossal thruster arrays. Relief washed over him at the sight, but it was short-lived. As they approached the airlock, Timothy noticed something amiss. The access panel had been crudely pried open, exposing a tangle of severed wires. "Sabotage," he muttered, kneeling to examine the damage. "Someone's been here ahead of us." Lyra's antennae twitched with agitation inside her helmet. "The anti-human extremists. They must have infiltrated the project." Timothy's mind raced as he assessed the situation. "We'll have to bypass the airlock controls manually. There's an emergency access hatch on the far side of the building. We can use that to get inside." As they circled the structure, a flicker of movement caught Timothy's eye. A figure in an Andorian environmental suit ducked behind a nearby thruster pylon. "We're not alone," Timothy whispered, gesturing subtly to Lyra. She nodded, unholstering her sidearm. "I'll draw them out. You get to that access hatch and start the override sequence." Before Timothy could protest, Lyra darted from cover, firing a series of energy blasts at the pylon. The saboteur returned fire, forcing Lyra to take shelter behind a rocky outcropping. Heart-pounding, Timothy used the distraction to make his way to the access hatch. His fingers flew over the manual release, muscle memory from countless simulations guiding his actions. With a hiss of escaping air, the hatch swung open. Inside, alarms blared as Timothy raced to the main control console. The saboteurs had done their work well. Half the systems were offline, and the remaining ones flickered ominously. "Lyra, what's your status?" he called over the comm. Her response came between bursts of weapons fire. "Two hostiles. I've got them pinned down, but I can't hold them forever." Timothy's fingers danced across the console, bypassing damaged systems and rerouting power. He pulled up the thruster activation sequence, only to find it corrupted beyond repair. "No, no, no," he muttered, frantically searching for a solution. His gaze fell upon a topographical map of Lumina, and inspiration struck. "Lyra, I need you in here," he shouted. "I've got a plan, but it's going to take both of us." Moments later, Lyra burst through the airlock, sealing it behind her. She rushed to Timothy's side, her eyes widening as she took in the extent of the damage. "The original plan won't work," Timothy explained, pulling up a holographic display of Lumina's subsurface. "But look here. These natural caverns run throughout the moon's crust. If we realign the thrusters to fire into these chambers, we can use them to amplify and direct the force. It's our only shot at generating enough power to move Lumina." Lyra studied the display, her scientific mind quickly grasping the implications. The calculations would have to be precise. One mistake, and we could tear Lumina apart. "I know," Timothy said grimly. "That's where you come in. I need you to run interference on the saboteurs while I reconfigure the thrusters. Once that's done, we'll need to reposition key components manually to align with the cavern system." A tremor shook the control center, nearly knocking them off their feet. The asteroid's approach was wreaking havoc on Lumina's already tenuous gravitational field. "We're running out of time," Lyra said, readying her weapon. "Let's do this." As Lyra moved to secure the perimeter, Timothy threw himself into the reconfiguration process. He pushed aside thoughts of failure, of the billions of lives depending on their success. His world narrowed to lines of code and engineering schematics. Meanwhile, on Andoria, Taurus and Vega huddled around a bank of monitors in the Planetary Defense Center. Taurus's face was etched with worry as she watched the asteroid's inexorable approach. "We've lost contact with Timothy and Lyra," she said, her voice tight with tension. Vega's fingers flew across a console, her eyes fixed on a complex gravitational model. "The asteroid's influence is causing severe electromagnetic interference. It's disrupting our long-range communications." A commotion at the entrance drew their attention. Commander Czar strode in, his uniform disheveled and a grim set to his jaw. "We've uncovered a conspiracy," he announced. "The anti-human movement is just a front. We've found evidence linking them to rival alien factions seeking to destabilize Andoria." Taurus's antenna quivered with shock. "How deep does this go?" "Deep," Czar replied. "We're still rooting out infiltrators in key positions. But right now, our priority has to be Lumina. What's the status of the thrusters?" Vega shook her head. "We've lost telemetry. All we can do now is wait and hope Timothy and Lyra can pull off a miracle." Back on Lumina, Timothy completed the thruster reconfiguration. He looked up to see Lyra drag an unconscious saboteur into the control room. "That's the last of them," she said, breathing heavily. "What's next?" Timothy pointed to a schematic on the main display. "We need to manually reposition these thruster components to align with the cavern system. It's going to be dangerous. We'll be exposed to Lumina's environment, and the gravitational disturbances are only getting worse." Lyra nodded, her expression resolute. "Then we'd better move fast." They exited the control center, stepping once more onto Lumina's treacherous surface. The work was grueling, requiring precision in the face of increasing gravitational chaos. More than once, Timothy found himself nearly torn from the surface, saved only by Lyra's quick reflexes. As they struggled to position the final component, a massive tremor rocked the moon. Timothy lost his grip, tumbling across the lunar landscape. He scrabbled for purchase, his fingers finding the edge of a newly formed crevasse. "Timothy!" Lyra's voice crackled through the comm as she rushed to his aid. She reached him just as his grip began to falter, hauling him to safety with Andorian strength. For a moment they clung to each other, the reality of their situation sinking in. "We need to finish this," Timothy said, his voice hoarse. They completed the realignment just as another violent tremor shook Lumina. Racing back to the control center, Timothy initiated the thruster sequence. The entire moon seemed to vibrate as the massive engines roared to life. On the main display, they watched as Lumina began to shift its orbit. The modified thruster configuration worked better than Timothy had dared hope, the natural caverns amplifying and focusing the immense power. But their elation was short-lived. As Lumina moved clear of the asteroid's path, alarms blared throughout the control center. "The orbit's destabilizing," Lyra shouted, her eyes wide with horror. "We're breaking free of Andoria's gravitational influence." Timothy's mind raced, calculating trajectories and possibilities. "We need to perform a second burn to stabilize the orbit, but the thrusters are fried. They can't take another activation." His gaze fell upon the sleek Andorian spacecraft that had brought them to Lumina. A desperate plan formed in his mind. "Lyra," he said, turning to his companion, "how do you feel about one more impossible task?" As Timothy outlined his audacious plan to use their ship to push Lumina back into a stable orbit, he felt the weight of Celeste's gift in his pocket. He pulled out the small, intricate device, studying it with new eyes. This isn't just a lucky charm, he realized, his heart racing with excitement. It's some kind of ancient Andorian tech. If I'm right, it might be the key to interfacing with your ship's systems and giving us the boost we need to pull this off. Lyra's eyes widened in recognition. A stellar harmonizer. They're incredibly rare, thought to be lost to time. Celeste must have known its true nature. As they prepared the ship for its unorthodox mission, Timothy marveled at the turn of events. Here he was, a human on an alien moon, about to attempt the impossible with technology he barely understood. Yet somehow it felt right. With Lyra at his side, he powered up the ship's systems, integrating the stellar harmonizer into the control interface. As the asteroid loomed ever closer and Lumina's orbit deteriorated, they launched into space, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in their desperate bid to save Andoria. The real test of their skills, their technology, and their newfound partnership was about to begin. The ship's engines whined as Timothy and Lyra pushed it to its limits, straining against Lumina's deteriorating orbit. Warning lights flashed across the control panel, indicating the immense stress on the craft's systems. "We're losing stability," Lyra called out, her fingers dancing across the controls. "The harmonizer is helping, but it's not enough." Timothy gritted his teeth, fighting against the gravitational forces threatening to tear them apart. "We need more power. Reroute everything non-essential to the main thrusters." As Lyra complied, a burst of static erupted from the communication system. Through the interference, Taurus's voice crackled to life. "Timothy, Lyra, can you hear me? There's a massive solar storm approaching your position. It will reach you in approximately 20 minutes. Timothy's heart sank. They were already pushing the ship beyond its design limits. A solar storm could be catastrophic. "Acknowledged, Taurus," he responded. "We'll adapt our strategy." As the communication cut out, Timothy's mind raced. The approaching storm posed a new threat, but it might also present an opportunity. He turned to Lyra, an idea forming. "Lumina's magnetic field," he said. "If we reconfigure the remaining functional thrusters, we could create a makeshift magnetic shield. It could protect us from the solar radiation and help guide Lumina back into orbit." Lyra's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. "It's risky, but it might work. We'll need to reprogram the thrusters and reroute power from non-essential systems." They set to work immediately, their movements precise despite the constant shuddering of the ship. Timothy's fingers flew across the control interface, reprogramming the thrusters while Lyra rerouted power systems. As they worked, the first waves of the solar storm began to buffet their ship. The craft groaned under the strain, systems flickering ominously. "Power fluctuations increasing," Lyra reported, her voice tense. "We're losing stability in the port thrusters." Timothy nodded grimly, making rapid adjustments. "Compensating? How's our shield projection looking?" Before Lyra could answer, a transmission from Andoria cut through the static. Vega's voice came through, urgent and clear. "Timothy, Lyra, we've detected a massive solar flare headed directly for Lumina. It will reach you just as the moon reaches the critical point in its new orbit. You have less than 5 minutes." Timothy exchanged a look with Lyra, both understanding the gravity of the situation. They needed more power for their magnetic shield, but they were already operating at the edge of the ship's capabilities. "We need to divert power from life support," Timothy said, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "It's the only way to boost the shield enough to withstand that flare." Lyra met his gaze, her expression resolute. "Do it, for Andoria." With a few quick commands, Timothy redirected power from the life support systems. Warning alarms blared as the oxygen levels began to drop, but the magnetic shield's strength surged. "Shield at maximum power," Lyra reported. "Oxygen levels critical. We have approximately 7 minutes of breathable air remaining." The ship shuddered violently as the solar flare struck. Brilliant light flooded the cockpit, the magnetic shield straining against the onslaught of radiation. For several heart-stopping moments, it seemed as though their efforts might fail. But the shield held. The combined force of the flare and the spacecraft's engines gave Lumina the final push it needed. On the navigation display, they watched as the moon's trajectory stabilized, settling into a proper orbit. A moment of triumph passed between them, unspoken but palpable. They had saved Andoria, but their own survival was far from assured. With Lumina secure, the battered spacecraft began to drift, its power reserves nearly depleted. Oxygen warnings flashed insistently, reminding them of their dwindling air supply. "We need to reach Lumina's surface," Timothy said, already moving to secure his environmental suit. "There are research outposts. If we can reach one..." Lyra nodded, following his lead. "We'll have to use our suit thrusters. It's risky, but it's our only shot." As they prepared for their bold strategy, the heirloom device from Celeste suddenly sprang to life. A holographic projection filled the cockpit, displaying a detailed map of Lumina's surface and subsurface structures. An ancient Andorian emergency shelter, Lyra breathed, her eyes wide with recognition. How did Celeste know? There was no time to ponder the mystery. The shelter's location gave them a target, potentially increasing their chances of survival. They would need every advantage they could get. With a final check of their suits, Timothy and Lyra stepped into the airlock. As it cycled open, exposing them to the vacuum of space, they shared a final look. No words were needed. The trust and tenacity in their eyes said it all. They launched themselves from the failing spacecraft, using precise bursts from their suit thrusters to navigate towards Lumina. As they descended, the asteroid that had threatened Andoria drifted past in the distance, its path altered by the complex chain of events they had set in motion. The moon's surface rushed up to meet them, a barren landscape of craters and jagged rock formations. Their suit sensors beeped urgently, warning of critically low oxygen levels. Every breath was measured, every movement calculated. They touched down on Lumina's surface with barely any oxygen to spare. In the distance, partially obscured by a rocky outcropping, they spotted the entrance to the ancient shelter. It was their only hope. Timothy and Lyra pushed forward, each step a monumental effort in the low gravity and their weakening state. Warning lights flashed inside their helmets, the last reserves of breathable air dwindling with each passing second. As they approached the shelter entrance, Timothy's vision began to blur. He stumbled, nearly losing his footing on the uneven terrain. Lyra caught him, her own movements sluggish but determined. The shelter's entrance loomed before them, an ancient Andorian script carved into the rock face. Lyra's gloved hand reached for the control panel, praying that millennia of disuse hadn't rendered it inoperable. A grinding sound echoed through their suits as the entrance began to shift, ancient mechanisms coming to life. A rush of stale but breathable air greeted them as they staggered inside, the door sealing behind them. They collapsed to the floor, struggling to remove their helmets with trembling hands. As the recycled air of the shelter filled their lungs, Timothy and Lyra shared a look of exhausted relief. They had survived against all challenges. But their ordeal was just getting started. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of their situation set in. They were stranded on Lumina, in an ancient shelter of unknown capabilities, with no immediate way to contact Andoria. Timothy's gaze fell upon the heirloom device, still clutched in his hand. Its surface glowed faintly, reacting to the shelter's systems. He realized that understanding its secrets might be the key to their survival, and to unraveling the larger mystery that had brought them to this moment. As Lyra began to explore the shelter's systems, Timothy studied the device intently. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their partnership forged in the crucible of their shared ordeal. And somewhere above them, Andoria shone in the sky, saved from destruction but forever changed by the events that had unfolded on its moon. Moon. As Timothy studied the mysterious device, a faint tremor shook the shelter. He looked up, exchanging a worried glance with Lyra. "Did you feel that?" he asked, pushing himself to his feet. Lyra nodded, her antenna twitching. It's not uncommon for Lumina to experience minor seismic activity, but she trailed off as another stronger tremor rattled through the structure. Timothy moved to the shelter's main console, his fingers flying over the ancient controls. These tremors are increasing in frequency and intensity. Something's not right. As if in response to his words, a section of the shelter's ceiling collapsed, showering them with dust and debris. Timothy instinctively threw himself over Lyra, shielding her from the falling rocks. "We need to reinforce the structure," Lyra said, coughing as she pushed herself up. "There should be emergency repair kits somewhere in here." They split up, searching the shelter's compartments for anything they could use to shore up the weakening walls. Timothy found a cache of metallic panels and bonding agents, while Lyra discovered tools that, despite their age, still appeared functional. Working together, they began to reinforce the most vulnerable areas of the shelter. Timothy held a panel in place while Lyra applied the bonding agent, their movements becoming more coordinated with each repair. "This shelter," Timothy said between labored breaths, "it's incredible that it's still functional after all this time. How old do you think it is?" Lyra paused, her eyes scanning the ancient Andorian script on a nearby wall. Based on the dialect, I'd estimate at least 10,000 years. This could predate our earliest records of Andorian civilization on the homeworld. As they worked, Timothy's mind raced, analyzing their situation. The increasing tremors, the age of the shelter, the mysterious device from Celeste. It all hinted at a larger picture he couldn't quite grasp. Suddenly, the shelter's computer crackled to life, speaking in an archaic Andorian dialect. Lyra's eyes widened as she translated. "It's warning us of critical power failures," she said, rushing to the main console. "The life support systems are draining faster than they can recharge." Timothy joined her, studying the unfamiliar readouts. "We need to reroute power from non-essential systems. Can you interface with the computer?" Lyra nodded, her fingers dancing across the controls. As she worked, Timothy noticed the heirloom device pulsing with a soft light. On impulse, he held it near the console. To their amazement, the device interfaced with the ancient systems, providing a burst of power that stabilized the failing life support. "Incredible," Lyra breathed. "That device, it's not just a key or a map, it's a power source." Their moment of triumph was short-lived as another violent tremor shook the shelter. A crack spiderwebbed across one of the walls, air hissing through the breach. "We need to seal that," Timothy shouted, already moving towards the damaged section. They worked frantically, using the last of their repair materials to patch the crack. As they finished, a distant rumble echoed through the structure, followed by an ominous silence. Lyra's antenna twitched nervously. "That sound, it came from deep within Lumina." Timothy's mind raced, connecting the dots. The orbital shift, the asteroid's near miss. They must have affected Lumina's core stability. He rushed back to the console, inputting a series of rapid calculations. Lyra watched, her expression growing more concerned as she interpreted the results. "Timothy," she said, her voice tight with worry, "if these readings are correct..." "Lumina's breaking apart," Timothy finished grimly. "And if it does..." "The debris would rain down on Andoria," Lyra whispered, the full weight of the situation sinking in. They stood in silence for a moment, the enormity of their predicament settling over them. Then, with rekindled drive, they turned back to the console. "We need to find a way to stabilize Lumina's core," Timothy said, his fingers flying over the controls. "There has to be something in these ancient systems we can use." Lyra nodded, already scanning through the shelter's database. "There might be. Look at this. Records of geological stabilizers placed throughout Lumina during its colonization. If we can activate them, we might be able to prevent the moon's disintegration," Timothy finished, a spark of hope igniting in his eyes. As they delved deeper into the ancient records, a crackling transmission broke through the shelter's communication system. Commander Zar's voice, distorted but recognizable, filled the air. "Timothy, Lyra, do you read? We've detected severe seismic activity on Lumina. A rescue ship is en route, but we're facing solar storm interference. ETA is approximately 6 hours." Timothy and Lyra exchanged a look of understanding. They knew they couldn't wait for rescue, not with Andoria's fate hanging in the balance. "Commander," Timothy responded, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation, "we've discovered critical information about Lumina's stability. We're going to attempt to activate ancient stabilization systems. It's risky, but it might be our only chance to save Andoria." There was a moment of static-filled silence before Zar's reply came through. "Understood. Be careful, both of you. We'll do our best to reach you as soon as possible." As the transmission ended, Timothy turned to Lyra. "We'll need to leave the shelter to access the stabilizer controls. Are you ready for this?" Lyra met his gaze, her commitment matching his own. "For Andoria," she said simply. They quickly gathered what supplies they could, including the heirloom device that had proven so crucial. As they prepared to step out onto Lumina's fracturing surface, Timothy felt a mix of fear and dedication. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew that with Lyra by his side, they stood a fighting chance. The shelter's airlocks cycled open, revealing Lumina's harsh, unforgiving landscape. Cracks snaked across the rocky terrain, a visual reminder of the moon's increasing instability. Timothy and Lyra exchanged one last look before stepping out into the unknown, their mission clear: to save Andoria, no matter the consequences. Cost. Taking a deep breath, Timothy activated his suit's emergency seal and pushed open the airlock. A gust of thin, frigid air rushed past them as they stepped onto Lumina's fractured surface. The landscape before them was alien and treacherous. Fissures snaked across the rocky terrain, some narrow enough to step over, others yawning wide like hungry mouths. The ground beneath their feet trembled constantly, a reminder of the moon's increasing instability. "We need to find a way down," Timothy said, scanning the horizon. His eyes locked onto a series of deep cracks in the distance. There, those fissures might lead us into Lumina's interior. Lyra nodded, her antenna twitching as she sensed the vibrations through the ground. "It's our best shot, but we'll need to move quickly. These tremors are getting worse." They set off across the barren landscape, each step carefully placed to avoid loose rocks or unstable ground. Timothy clutched the heirloom device tightly, its faint glow providing a small measure of comfort in the harsh environment. As they approached the fissures, a violent tremor shook the moon. Timothy lost his footing, sliding towards the edge of a newly formed crack. Lyra lunged forward, grabbing his arm and pulling him back from the brink. "Thanks," Timothy gasped, his heart racing. "That was too close." Lyra's grip on his arm tightened. "We're in this together, remember?" They reached the largest fissure, its depths disappearing into darkness. Using pitons and rope from their makeshift gear, they began their descent into Lumina's interior. The walls of the fissure were jagged and unstable, forcing them to move with extreme caution. As they descended deeper, the darkness gave way to an eerie, pulsating light. The source soon became apparent. The walls of the cavern were studded with crystals that glowed in rhythm with the moon's seismic activity. Timothy's eyes widened in recognition. These crystals, they're similar to the ones used in Andorian energy systems. If we could harness their power somehow. Lyra examined the crystals closely, her scientific mind racing. "You're right, their resonance frequency matches Lumina's core vibrations. If we can align them properly, we might be able to stabilize the moon." They pushed deeper into the cavern network, the crystals growing larger and more numerous. The air grew thick with an electric charge, making their hair stand on end. Finally, they emerged into a vast underground chamber that took their breath away. At the center of the chamber stood an enormous machine, its design unmistakably Andorian, but far more ancient than anything they had ever seen. Its surface was covered in intricate patterns that pulsed with a faint blue light. "This must be it," Lyra breathed, approaching the machine with reverence. "An ancient device for regulating Lumina's core." Timothy circled the machine, his mind working furiously. "It looks inactive. We need to find a way to power it up." As Lyra began interfacing with the archaic systems, Timothy started examining the machine's components, looking for a way to reactivate it. The ground beneath them shuddered constantly, a stark reminder of the urgency of their task. Suddenly, a deafening crack echoed through the chamber. Timothy looked up to see a section of the ceiling collapsing. Without thinking, he shoved Lyra out of the way as massive chunks of rock came crashing down. When the dust settled, Timothy found himself pinned beneath a pile of debris. He could hear Lyra calling his name, her voice tinged with panic. "Timothy, hold on, I'm coming!" Through the haze of pain, Timothy watched in awe as Lyra, her face set with purpose, lifted impossibly heavy rocks to free him. As she pulled him clear, he noticed her breathing had become labored, her movements sluggish. "Lyra, you're hurt," he said, struggling to his feet. She waved off his concern. "We don't have time. We need to activate that machine now." They staggered together to the ancient device. Timothy's practiced eye quickly identified the main control interface. As he began the complex process of reactivation, Lyra worked on deciphering the machine's operational language. "Timothy," Lyra said, her voice tight with tension, "I've figured out how it works. The machine needs a constant input of bioenergy to function. One of us will have to connect to it directly." Timothy met her gaze, understanding the implications immediately. Without hesitation, he said, "I'll do it. My human physiology might be more compatible with the energy requirements. Lyra shook her head, wincing as the movement caused her pain. No, we do this together. Human and Andorian. Our combined bioenergies might be exactly what this machine needs. As they prepared to interface with the device, Timothy couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration for his Andorian partner. Despite her injuries, her drive never wavered. They placed their hands on the designated connection points, bracing themselves for what was to come. The machine hummed to life, tendrils of energy wrapping around their arms and spreading through their bodies. Timothy gasped as he felt his life force being drawn into the machine. Beside him, Lyra gritted her teeth, her antenna rigid with the strain. The chamber around them began to vibrate, the crystals in the walls pulsing in harmony with the energy flowing through them. As their combined bioenergies powered up the ancient device, Timothy felt a connection not just to the machine, but to Lyra as well. Their life forces intertwined, human and Andorian, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. The machine's hum grew to a roar. Energy arced between the crystals, forming a web of light that spread outward through Lumina's network of caverns. Timothy could feel the moon's core responding, its erratic movements beginning to stabilize. But the process was taking a severe toll on their bodies. Timothy's vision began to blur, his legs trembling with the effort of staying upright. He could sense Lyra's life force flickering, growing weaker by the second. "Hold on, Lyra," he managed to say through gritted teeth. "We're almost there." As consciousness began to slip away, Timothy's last sensation was Lyra's hand gripping his own. Together they poured the last of their strength into the machine, their united will focused on saving Lumina and Andoria. The world around them faded to white, the roar of energy drowning out all other sounds. In that moment, suspended between life and death, Timothy and Lyra's minds touched. A shared vision of Andoria, safe and thriving, flashed between them. Then darkness claimed them both. In the vast chamber, now thrumming with stabilizing energy, Timothy and Lyra lay motionless at the base of the ancient machine. Their hands remained clasped, a final testament to the unity of human and Andorian. As Lumina's core settled into a stable rhythm, the fate of the two heroes hung in the balance, their life signs faint but not yet extinguished. Above, on Lumina's newly stabilized surface, Commander Zar's rescue ship touched down. The race to find Timothy and Lyra in the moon's labyrinthine depths had begun, their survival far from certain. Certain. The faint beeping of life support equipment echoed through the ancient chamber, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had fallen after the machine's activation. Commander Zar's voice crackled through the rescue team's comms. "Any sign of them yet?" "Negative, sir," replied Lieutenant Thora, her antenna twitching as she adjusted the settings on her scanner. "The energy readings are off the charts. It's interfering with our equipment." Zar's eyes sharp. "Keep searching. They have to be down there somewhere." The team pressed on, their path illuminated by the soft glow of bioluminescent fungi that had sprouted in the wake of Lumina's stabilization. As they descended deeper into the moon's core, the residual energy fields intensified, causing their equipment to spark and malfunction. "Sir," called out Ensign Creve, "I'm picking up 2 faint life signs ahead. But there's something strange about them." Zar moved to the front of the group, his eyes narrowing as he studied the readout. "What do you mean, strange?" Krebs' antenna drooped in confusion. "It's like they're merged somehow. I've never seen anything like it." As they rounded a corner, the ancient chamber came into view. The massive Andorian device dominated the space, its surface still pulsing with a faint blue light. At its base lay Timothy and Lyra, their bodies intertwined and connected to the machine by tendrils of energy. "By the ice gods," whispered Thora, her blue skin paling at the sight. Zar snapped into action. "Medical team, front and center. We need to get them disconnected from that thing now." As the medical officers rushed forward, their instruments began to short out. The energy field surrounding Timothy and Lyra repelled their attempts to get close. "Sir," one of the officers called out, "we can't get near them. The energy field is too strong." Zar's mind raced. "Engineering team, deploy the energy dampeners. We need to create a safe corridor to reach them." The engineers sprang into action, setting up portable energy-dampening units around Timothy and Lyra. Slowly, painstakingly, they created a bubble of stability in the chaos of energy swirling around the ancient device. As soon as the field was stable, Czar and the medical team rushed in. They worked quickly, using specialized tools to carefully sever the energy tendrils connecting Timothy and Lyra to the machine. The moment the last connection was broken, both Timothy and Lyra collapsed completely. Their skin was pale, their breathing shallow and erratic. "Vital signs critical," reported the chief medical officer, her hands flying over her instruments. "We need to get them to the ship immediately." As they were loaded onto stretchers, Timothy's hand fell limply to his side, brushing against Lyra's. For a brief moment, a spark of blue energy arced between them. The journey back to the surface was a blur of frantic activity. The medical team worked tirelessly, using every technique at their disposal to keep Timothy and Lyra alive. Czar paced at the rear of the group, his antenna twitching with nervous energy. As they emerged onto Lumina's surface, the rescue ship loomed before them, its medical bay prepared and waiting. The loading ramp had barely touched the ground before the team was rushing up it, the unconscious forms of Timothy and Lyra held securely on their stretchers. Inside the ship's state-of-the-art medical bay, a flurry of activity erupted. Human and Andorian medical personnel worked in perfect synchronization, their movements a testament to the growing cooperation between their species. "I'm detecting anomalies in their genetic structure," announced Dr. Schran, her antenna quivering as she studied the readouts. "It's as if their DNA is rewriting itself." Her human counterpart, Dr. Chen, leaned in to examine the data. "Impossible. Look at these markers. Timothy's genome is incorporating Andorian sequences, and Lyra's is showing human characteristics." As the ship broke Lumina's atmosphere and set course for Andoria, the medical team's efforts intensified. They administered a cocktail of drugs designed to stabilize both human and Andorian physiology, hoping to slow the mysterious changes occurring at a cellular level. On the bridge, Commander Czar opened a channel to Andoria. Taurus's face appeared on the console, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. "Commander, what news?" Czar took a deep breath. "We've recovered them, Taurus, but their condition is complicated. We're en route to Andoria now. Have your best medical minds ready." Taurus nodded, her antenna drooping slightly. "I'll alert the High Council. We'll have everything prepared for your arrival." As the call ended, Czar turned to look out at the stars streaking by. The fate of Timothy and Lyra hung in the balance, and with it, the future of human-Andorian relations. In the medical bay, Timothy and Lyra lay side by side, their vital signs weak but steady. As the ship raced towards Andoria, their brainwave patterns began to synchronize, pulsing in a rhythm that echoed the energy of the ancient device that had nearly claimed their lives. The rescue ship descended through Andoria's atmosphere, a trail of ice crystals forming in its wake. On the ground, a crowd had gathered outside the planet's most advanced medical facility. Humans and Andorians stood side by side, their breaths creating small clouds in the frigid air as they waited for news. As the ship touched down, a team of medical professionals surged forward. The loading ramp lowered, revealing Commander Czar and the medical team with Timothy and Lyra on hovering stretchers. Taurus pushed through the crowd, her daughters Vega and Celeste close behind. "How are they?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. Dr. Schran shook her head. "Stable for now, but their condition is unlike anything we've ever seen. We need to get them inside immediately." The procession moved swiftly into the medical facility, where a team of Andoria's top doctors was waiting. As Timothy and Lyra were transferred to the intensive care unit, Vega pulled Dr. Schran aside. "I've been studying the data you sent ahead," Vega said, her antenna twitching with excitement despite the gravity of the situation. "I have a theory about their shared brainwave patterns." Dr. Schran raised an eyebrow ridge. "Go on." "I believe the ancient device created a quantum entanglement between their neural pathways," Vega explained. "If I'm right, this connection could be key to their recovery." As the medical team debated Vega's theory, Timothy and Lyra lay motionless in their beds, monitored by an array of advanced equipment. Their vital signs remained weak, but the synchronized pulse of their brainwaves continued, a faint blue glow occasionally shimmering across their skin. Outside the medical facility, Commander Czar addressed the growing crowd. Humans and Andorians alike listened intently as he recounted the events on Lumina and the heroic actions of Timothy and Lyra. Today we witness the power of cooperation between our peoples, Czar concluded, his voice carrying across the icy plaza. The bond forged between Timothy and Lyra in the depths of Lumina may well be the foundation of a new era of human-Andorian relations. As Czar's words echoed across Andoria, the High Council convened in an emergency session. The events of the past few days had shaken the very foundations of Andorian society, challenging long-held beliefs about their place in the galaxy. In the medical facility, days turned into weeks as Timothy and Lyra's condition remained critical. The team of human and Andorian doctors worked tirelessly, developing new treatments to address the ongoing changes in their patients' physiology. Vega spent countless hours in the lab, refining her theory about the quantum entanglement of Timothy and Lyra's minds. Her work caught the attention of both human and Andorian scientists, sparking a new field of research into interspecies neural connections. As news of Timothy and Lyra's condition spread, a wave of change swept across Andoria. The undeniable evidence of human-Andorian cooperation in saving their world twice over silenced most of the remaining anti-human sentiment. Cultural exchange programs flourished, and joint scientific ventures were proposed across various fields. In a move that sent shockwaves through Andorian society, Taurus announced her intention to formally adopt Timothy into her family. The declaration challenged centuries of tradition and opened new possibilities for human-Andorian integration. As the medical team continued their efforts to revive Timothy and Lyra, they made a startling discovery. The genetic changes triggered by the ancient device were not stabilizing as expected, but rather continuing to evolve at an accelerating rate. Dr. Chen stared at the latest test results in disbelief. If this continues, their genetic structure could completely destabilize within days. Vega, who had been working tirelessly on a solution, stepped forward. "I have a proposal," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "We can use a modified version of the asteroid deflection technology to create a controlled energy field. It could potentially stabilize their evolving physiology." The room fell silent as the implications of her suggestion sank in. Dr. Shran was the first to speak. "The risk would be enormous. We have no way of knowing how their altered physiology would react to such a treatment." "But if we do nothing, we'll lose them both," Taurus interjected, her voice thick with emotion. Commander Czar, who had been listening silently, straightened his posture. "Prepare the equipment," he ordered. "We'll begin the procedure as soon as it's ready." As word of the impending procedure spread, tension mounted on Andoria and Earth. The outcome would not only determine the fate of Timothy and Lyra, but potentially shape the future of human-Andorian relations and interstellar cooperation. In the medical bay, final preparations were underway. The modified deflection technology hummed to life, creating a shimmering field around Timothy and Lyra's beds. The medical team watched anxiously as the energy levels began to rise, the fate of two worlds hanging in the balance. Timothy and Lyra lay motionless, their hands almost touching, as the energy field enveloped them. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then suddenly, their bodies arched in unison, a brilliant blue light erupting from their joined hands and spreading rapidly across their skin. The monitoring equipment went haywire, alarms blaring as their vital signs fluctuated wildly. The medical team watched in a mixture of awe and terror as the light intensified, growing brighter and brighter until it was almost blinding. And then, in the heart of that radiant cocoon, Timothy's fingers twitched, intertwining with Lyra's. Their eyes remained closed, but their lips moved in perfect synchronization, whispering words too soft to hear over the hum of the energy field and the frantic beeping of the medical equipment. Dr. Shran leaned forward, her antennae straining to catch the whispered words. Her eyes widened in shock as she began to make out what Timothy and Lyra were saying. "What is it?" Vega asked, her voice barely audible over the chaos in the room. "What are they saying?" Dr. Shran turned to face the others, her expression a mix of disbelief and wonder. It's a language I've never heard before, something entirely new." As the energy field continued to pulse around them, Timothy and Lyra's whispers grew louder. their unknown words echoing through the medical bay. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, waiting to see what would emerge from this unprecedented melding of human and Andorian. Andorian. As the energy field pulsed around Timothy and Lyra, their whispers grew louder, filling the medical bay with an otherworldly cadence. The assembled team watched in awe as the two patients, still unconscious, seemed to communicate in a language beyond comprehension. Vega's antenna twitched as she made final adjustments to the modified asteroid deflection technology. Her fingers flew across the control panel, fine-tuning the energy output to match the fluctuations in Timothy and Lyra's vital signs. "Energy levels are holding steady," she reported, her voice tight with concentration. "Initiating final phase of the treatment." The low hum of the equipment intensified as the energy field around Timothy and Lyra grew brighter. The monitoring equipment displayed a dizzying array of data, showing the rapid changes occurring in their genetic structures. Dr. Chen leaned in, his eyes wide as he watched the display. "Incredible," he breathed. "Their DNA is restructuring itself at an unprecedented rate. It's as if their genetic codes are dancing with each other." The room held its collective breath as the procedure continued. Taurus stood at the foot of the beds, her daughters flanking her on either side. Her eyes never left Timothy and Lyra's faces, searching for any sign of distress or awakening. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the medical bay. The vital sign monitors flashed red as Timothy and Lyra's life signs became erratic. "We're losing them!" Dr. Schran shouted, her hands flying over the controls. "Their systems are going into shock." Panic rippled through the room. Vega worked frantically to stabilize the energy field, but nothing seemed to be working. The genetic restructuring was pushing their bodies to the brink of total systemic failure. In the chaos, Celeste's eyes fell on the ancient Andorian heirloom device she had brought with her. Without hesitation, she lunged forward, snatching it from its protective case. "Celeste, what are you doing?" Taurus cried, but her daughter was already moving. With drive etched on her face, Celeste placed the artifact between Timothy and Lyra's beds. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as if responding to some unheard call, the device began to glow. A soft, pulsating light emanated from the artifact, interfacing with the energy field surrounding Timothy and Lyra. The effect was immediate and astonishing. The chaotic swirl of energy smoothed out, synchronizing with the steady pulse of the ancient device. Vega's antenna stood straight up as she registered the change. "The artifact," she gasped. "It's stabilizing the field." Her fingers flew across the controls, integrating the new energy signature into the treatment protocol. The combined energies created a harmonious resonance that permeated Timothy and Lyra's bodies. The alarms quieted as their vital signs strengthened and stabilized. On the genetic display, the frantic dance of DNA settled into a new, stable pattern, a perfect blend of human and Andorian genetic structures. As the energy field slowly dissipated, the room held its breath. Timothy's fingers twitched first, intertwining with Lyra's. Then, in perfect synchronization, their eyes fluttered open. Timothy blinked, his gaze focusing on the blue face hovering above him. "Lyra?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. Lyra turned her head, her antenna quivering as she met his eyes. "Timothy," she replied, a smile spreading across her face. But neither of them had spoken aloud. Their eyes widened in shared realization. Somehow they could hear each other's thoughts, feel each other's emotions. The connection that had begun in the depths of Lumina had evolved into something far beyond what anyone could have imagined. "They're communicating telepathically," Vega breathed, her scientific mind already racing with the implications. As Timothy and Lyra sat up, supported by the medical team, they marveled at the changes in each other. Timothy's skin had taken on a faint blue tinge, while Lyra's antenna had shortened slightly. They were neither fully human nor fully Andorian, but something beautifully in between. In the days that followed, news of Timothy and Lyra's recovery and transformation spread like wildfire across both Earth and Andoria. Scientists flocked to study their unique physiology, while diplomats and politicians saw their bond as a living symbol of human Andorian cooperation. Taurus, true to her word, began preparations for Timothy's formal adoption into her family. The ceremony was to be a grand affair, broadcast across both worlds as a celebration of unity and new beginnings. As Timothy and Lyra regained their strength, they discovered that their telepathic bond allowed them to bridge the gap between human and Andorian thought processes in ways never before possible. They found themselves uniquely positioned to foster understanding between the two species. Commander Czar, seeing the potential in this new development, accelerated his proposal for a joint space exploration initiative. The High Council, impressed by the recent events, gave their approval with unprecedented speed. One evening, as the twin moons of Andoria rose over the horizon, Timothy and Lyra stood on an observation deck overlooking the capital city. Their hands were intertwined, their minds sharing thoughts and feelings without need for words. "It's beautiful," Timothy thought, taking in the icy spires that glittered in the moonlight. Lyra's antenna twitched in agreement. "It is, and now it's your home too." They turned as footsteps approached. Taurus joined them, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. Her eyes shone with pride as she looked at Timothy, now truly to become her son, and at Lyra, her daughter, who had found an unexpected path to happiness. "You've given us more than we could have ever hoped for," Taurus said softly. "Not just the salvation of our planet, but a future brighter than we dared to imagine." As they stood together, a streak of light caught their attention. Looking up, they watched as the first joint human Andorian spacecraft launched into the star-studded sky, its mission to establish a permanent research base on Lumina. The ship's name, Unity, was just barely visible on its hull as it climbed higher, carrying a crew of scientists and explorers from both worlds. Among them were some of the very people who had worked tirelessly to save Timothy and Lyra. Timothy and Lyra exchanged a look of understanding and love. Their transformation had given them a unique perspective on the universe and their place in it. As the spacecraft disappeared into the vastness of space, they turned towards each other, ready to face whatever the future might hold. Together, they would lead their united peoples into a new age of exploration, cooperation, and shared destiny. The journey ahead was uncharted, but with their bond and the support of both their worlds, they were prepared to meet any challenge. As the last traces of the Unity's launch faded from the sky, Taurus squeezed their shoulders gently. "Come," she said with a smile. "We have much to prepare for. Your first mission to Lumina awaits." Timothy and Lyra nodded, their minds already racing with plans and possibilities. Hand in hand, they followed Taurus back into the building, leaving the observation deck behind. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and potential, as two worlds came together in a union that would change the course of galactic history.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.